Okay, my name is Howard Eber and I am an alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone to week number 6 of the fifth Zoom cycle for the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop. I've been doing this probably about 14 years of consistent Sundays. And one of the many perks of doing a study like this is I've gotten to know a lot of great people, um, authorities who have taught me so much. Several of them are here today, and I'm honored that they have become regular attendees of this group. I've mentioned one of them in particular over and over. I've mentioned our friend Mitchell Klein, who wrote the Clarence Snyder book that we've promoted a lot, but also our friend Gary Neidhart is here. Gary has written one book in particular that's relevant to what we're talking about here. It's called King Charles of New York City. And Andy will put the information for this in the chat. So if you're interested in picking up a copy, you can do that. And he also put out a new book called Bobby B, The Untold Story of AA's Fantastic Communicator. Andy will also put that information in there. But I give you all of this information for Gary because Gary's here and he's been here before, and his wife is a regular member of our group. But he wrote me an email based on what we talked about last week. And I wanted to pass along some of the information that he mentioned here because it is quite interesting. You know, we take for granted certain things and we repeat it over and over and over, but we really don't give it that much thought. And he mentioned that 45,000 number of patients that we mentioned as Dr. Silkworth had treated 40 to 45,000 patients between Knickerbocker Hospital and Towns Hospital. Has to be a little Bill Wilson exaggeration, as Gary says, which is quite typical of him. And he does the calculations. He said that Towns Hospital had only 50 beds in it, and it roughly served 1,000 patients a year. Silkworth split his time between Towns Hospital and Knickerbocker for the last 6 years. So even a $6,000 figure is questionable. Knickerbocker, I've read, had less than 20 beds for alcoholics. So once again, Bill Wilson is exaggerating a little bit. Doesn't matter. The guy is an expert, and that's all we need to know. And he gave us our first step and made it possible for us to be here today. So thank you, Gary, for taking the time to fill us in on all that. He gave me some other information, which we'll touch on today based on the letters that we're going to be reading. But where we are is in the doctor's opinion. We have started in the 4th edition on page XXV, the initial introduction done by Bill Wilson, where he introduces and gives the creds for Dr. Silkworth. And then he includes Dr. Silkworth's what is referred to as the first letter. It's a bit of a misnomer because there's only one letter. The second thing we're about to read is a statement. It's been referred to as the second letter, but it's not a letter at all. They mention it here as a statement, and that's what it's considered. But oops, sorry about that. If you can just mute everyone, I'd appreciate it, whoever is handling that today. Okay. And in this introduction, Bill Wilson says, you can pay attention to what Dr. Silkworth has to say because he's had this great experience at Towns Hospital. And Dr. Silkworth basically says in the letter, you can trust anything that Bill Wilson has to say. So it's another little cute game that Bill Wilson plays. But he has the end part of Dr. Silkworth's first letter, which is the only letter, is a statement that you can rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. We consider that a promise. It's also quite an understatement, but it also refers to this book and the people in this book. I've heard that expression applied to meetings, and I think that's not appropriate. Saying that you can rely absolutely on everything you hear people say at meetings, I think is dangerous, because you hear a lot of crazy things at meetings, starting off with don't drink and go to meetings, and that's all you have to do. I mean, we can go on from there, and we do. We have a rather extensive presentation called That Ain't in the Big Book, where we go over the things you hear at a meeting that just have no bearing, have no place in this book. And so when he says you can rely absolutely on anything they have to say, we're talking about the book, not the fellowship. And in this this connective tissue between the letter and the statement, Bill Wilson takes over, and he explains that our bodies were sickened as well as our mind, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. And he says our bodies were sickened as well, which is the first mention of alcoholism as an illness. Up until now, it was all thought to be in a person's mind. It was all a question of will, just say no, and all of those things. And then he says, we have an allergy to alcohol, which to me was a revolutionary statement, because I thought an allergy was something different than what he's talking about here, because I'm allergic to ragweed and pollen and hay fever. And if I'm exposed to just the slightest amount of it, I have an immediate physiological reaction. I sneeze, I tear, I sniffle immediately. If you're allergic to strawberries and you eat one, you have an immediate reaction. So how can I be allergic to something I consume in such large quantities? Well, one of the things I learned in these workshops is to go to the dictionary when I'm not sure. And in the dictionary, we found that an allergy is defined as a body's abnormal is the key word here, reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. And we noted that last week, the definition of an allergy, that the normal reaction to the ingestion of these chemicals is to at some point say no. Either I'm going to get sick if I do any more, or I've got to drive, so I got to be careful. Or they start saying some very, very strange things like, I don't need any more. I'm right where I want to be. I always drank and drug with the expectation of arriving where I wanted to be, but it was always one more drink away and one more away and one more away. So my reaction, my abnormal reaction, is that I can't say no. With me, it's always more and more. And that is my allergic type reaction. That's what we're referring to when we say we have an allergy. We're talking about our abnormal reaction to the ingestion of these chemicals. And he continues to say that in this connective tissue, that we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane. The spiritual is this journey that we're on, this quest that we're on to make contact with and reliance upon this power greater than ourselves that can do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And he finalizes his statement by pointing out that very often the patient, the prospect, their brain needs to be cleared before they're approached, which is also the first reference to approach in this book. We note approach in blue. Someone, I'm sure, will put it in the chat. The highlight key that we use, prayers and promises, are in pink. In this case, approached references we highlighted in blue. And above where it says that his brain be cleared, it says more often than not, it's imperative that the man's brain be cleared. Imperative is a must. It's a $50 version of must, and we highlight musts in green. So he said that it's imperative that the person's brain be cleared, maybe a little detox before you start laying a solution on them. And then he says the doctor writes, and this is what's considered the second letter. It is actually a statement. And in this statement, he makes mention of the fact that a few years ago, he wrote an article, and that article was in the Lancet Journal. It was published in 1937. It was actually the date was May 21st, 1937. The article was entitled "The Reclamation of the Alcoholic," a copy of which is in your emails, was sent out today. There's a copy of it in all your emails. You're welcome to read it. And very much what was in this article had laid out, there we go, had laid out Dr. Silkworth's belief in the physical as well as the mental part of our condition. And it didn't go over very well. The medical community did not think well. He thought Dr. Silkworth was being conned by these alcoholics. So it's one of the reasons why Dr. Silkworth said, if you use my opinion, and it's got to be an opinion, it can't be anything other than that, you can't use my name. Because when he originally used his name, he caught a workout over it. So in the first printing of that article in 1937, it had his name. When the big book came out, the book was not signed by Dr. Silkworth. It was W-MD. Now, by the time the second edition came out in 1955, the AMA and the American Psychiatric Association had recognized alcoholism as an illness, and Bill Wilson checked with the Silkworth family, and they were okay with using Dr. Silkworth's name. So anything beyond the second edition will have the signature of William D. Silkworth, because at that point he was sort of vindicated. It's unfortunate that he didn't get to see that because he passed away in 1951. But be that as it may, this statement is based on this reclamation of the alcoholic. In fact, there is an explanation in these pages you'll find of a term he uses in this book, but he forgets to put the definition of. That term is moral psychology. And when we get to that point, I'll mention what the definition is in these pages. But Bill Wilson asked Dr. Silkworth to contribute a second statement. And one of the things that I sent you in the email package was a letter from an Esther Richards. Andy, if you'll put up number 8, this Esther Richards was the psychiatrist, there it is, in charge of the Henry Phillips Clinic at Johns Hopkins University. It was an outpatient facility treating alcoholics. And I think you can barely see it, but at the end of the first paragraph is a statement. She says, I think you should get a #1 physician who has a wide knowledge of the alcoholic's medical and social problems to write an introduction. This was a suggestion sent to Bill Wilson when Dr. Richards got a Nimio copy that went out to certain professionals before the book was printed. And that is thought to be one of the reasons why Bill asked Dr. Silkworth to contribute a little bit more than that basic introduction, the first letter, which leads us to what we're reading right now. And he wrote something that he later published in the medical record in July of 1939 that was a little too, Andy, you could take that down, that was a little too complicated for our book. So Bill edited what Dr. Silkworth wrote. Dr. Silkworth wrote, and one of the things in your emails is the psychological rehabilitation of alcoholics. This is what became this statement. If you read it, you'll see that he's trying to explain in layman's language in the book what Dr. Silkworth wrote in here. There's only one paragraph in this whole thing that is taken exactly as it is in here and published in the book. And you'll see how interesting it is when we get there. But let's take a look at that. We're talking about it enough. The doctor writes, and we're now on page XXVII, which I was there that day in school. That's Roman numeral 27. The doctor writes, the subject presented in this book, please highlight the subject presented in this book, because it's actually subjects. There are 2 subjects in this book, alcoholism and spiritual experience. That's what this book is about: alcoholism and spiritual experience. And he says the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance, and something that's paramount is first, foremost. It is of chief concern, number one. So he's saying that of paramount importance, the subjects mentioned in this book are of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical doctor of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. And of course, he's talking about Towns Hospital. And I'll put up an ad that they ran. Andy, if you'll give us that, I think it was number 5 or something like that. Sorry, I'm not more organized here. There we go. There's the an ad that ran for the Charlestown's Hospital. That's what it looked like in those days. It was a rather expensive place to go, but that's what we're talking about, Towns Hospital. And that's one of the ads. And if we go to the next picture, number 5, the building still exists. The building is at 293 Central Park West between 89th and 90th Street. If you go there today, it looks a little bit like this picture, but certain things have changed. And I've designated 2 spots in particular, spot A and spot B. In the original Towns Hospital, the main entrance is on the right, number B. A was not part of the entrance. A was a way into the basement. But entrance B was the main entrance to the hospital. And then there was the other one on the other side that's not designated as, it was C. But let's go to the next picture, which is a picture I took of the hospital, because this is the way it looks today. It is not a hospital. It is a co-op. The main entrance is now A, right in the center. You could see that they've pretty much changed the outlook in the front so that it does have a presentable staircase going down into a fancy lobby. The entrance B on the right is sealed off. That door does not open. This is what it looks like today. And I've stood in the lobby of that building and I get chills knowing what happened in it. So if you're ever in Manhattan and would like to go to see what was Towns Hospital, the address is 293 Central Park West, overlooking beautiful Central Park between 89th and 90th Street, a little uptown from the famous Dakota where John Lennon was shot. So there's some background information on the Towns Hospital. I'll get back to the book. So he says, there was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. I love that. I love that sense of humor of Bill's. Again, this is Bill Wilson interpreting what was in Dr. Silkworth's notes, and I think he enhanced it a bit here. There's such masterly detail. But here's an interesting paragraph. This paragraph that we're about to read was taken exactly from the original article. So I'm going to read it without any changes, any comments, any suggestions. And then I'm going to suggest a few alterations and see if it doesn't make it more understandable. Because when I first read this paragraph, I had no idea what they were talking about. And here's what it says. It says, we doctors have recalled for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we perhaps are not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lay outside our synthetic knowledge. Huh? What the hell does that mean? I don't know how many times I read it, it still doesn't make it clear what he's talking about. So I'm going to show you what somebody showed me and see if it makes more sense. I'm going to ask you to underline certain words and above them, put an alternative. It says, we doctors have realized for some time that some form of, please underline moral psychology. And above moral psychology, write spiritual experience. Was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but please underline its application. Underline those two words. And above it, write the spiritual experience. In place of its application, we're going to say the spiritual experience. Presented difficulties beyond our conception, underline conception, if you will, and above it, write medical capacities. CAPACITIES, medical capacities. That's in place of conception. What with our underline ultra modern, please. And above that, write most up to date. So most up to date is going to replace ultra modern. Our scientific approach to everything, we perhaps are not well equipped to apply the powers of, please underline the word good, and above it, write God. Please substitute God for good. That lie outside our synthetic knowledge, and please underline synthetic knowledge, and above that, write experience. Now I'm going to reread that paragraph with those alterations made and see if it doesn't sound a little bit easier to understand. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of spiritual experience was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but the spiritual experience presented difficulties beyond our medical capacities. What with our most up-to-date standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of God that lie outside of our experience. Now, I'm not a physician. I have a sponsee who is, and he verified for me what I've been saying for years, that nowhere in medical school was there a class called God 101. It just was not part of the curriculum. So he's saying here that we knew that some form of spiritual intervention was the way to help these folks, but we had no idea of how that was to happen, how that was to be brought about, because we never had that kind of course taught in college. And you could see why some of this stuff needed to be rewritten. And incidentally, one of the interesting things I've learned is that the first few words here where he says, we doctors, I think when he says we doctors, and he does it a few times in the course of these next few pages, he's talking about like-minded thinkers, people like Dr. Silkworth, who we talked about 2 weeks ago, like Thomas Trotter, Dr. Thomas Trotter, and Dr. Alexander Lambert, and Magnus Huss. These people, who one of whom was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, who thought and wrote about alcoholism being a disease or an illness long before Dr. Silkworth came around. So when Dr. Silkworth says we doctors, I think, it's just my opinion, that he's referring to those like-minded thinkers, whether they are some of these guys we mentioned from the past, or maybe some progressives right here, right now. But he's not talking about the medical community as a whole. He's talking about these thinkers, these forward thinkers, these visionaries who were not limited by the customs and traditions and fixed ideas of the time. Let's continue. Next paragraph. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book, Bill Wilson, came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas. Please underline some ideas and above it, write A/O. And anytime we come across the terms real alcoholic or alcoholic in this book, we're going to underline it and above it put A/O, because what A/O stands for is allergy and obsession. So we're always clear when we talk about the real alcoholic. What are we talking about? We're not talking about a moderate drinker, not talking about a hard drinker. We're not talking about how much you drink, how often you get in trouble, how often you drink, how the consequences of your drinking. We're not talking about any of those things. We're talking about what separates the real alcoholic from the hard and moderate drinker is the allergy and the obsession. And we're going to be talking quite a bit about that over the next few weeks. But he's talking about that here, that when he came to the hospital, Dr. Silkworth told Bill, diagnosed what was wrong with him. He wasn't weak. He wasn't morally corrupt. He wasn't a bad person. He had an actual physical malady that when he ingested alcohol, it reacted in his system differently than other people's. That he had an actual allergic type reaction, which is an abnormal reaction, which was to not be able to say no. That the first drink wants the second calls out for the third screams out for the fourth, and by the time we get to the 10th or the 15th drink, we want that 16th drink more than we wanted anything ever in our lives. And that is an abnormal allergic reaction, and Bill Wilson learned about it at his first stay in the hospital. And if you remember last week, we broke down 4 stays. Bill Wilson was in Towns Hospital 4 times. The first time was the summer of 33. Second time was the summer of 34. Third time was the fall of 34. And the last time was December of 34. And he's saying here at his first visit, the first time he was there, he acquired some ideas. He found out about the allergy and the obsession, which he put into practical application at once. Please underline practical application at once. And above it, write action. He put it into action to try and help people right away. And notice he said at once. It doesn't say after 90 days, it doesn't say after a year, it doesn't say after 6 months, at once. Many years ago, continuing, he says he put into action at once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgivings, with some doubts, we consented. Now think about that. There's a patient here who's being allowed to come back and talk to other patients, and he's only got, what, a few weeks, a few months. One of the things that Gary pointed out in the email he sent me was, he says, it was remarkable that Bill Wilson was allowed to talk to drunks at Towns Hospital because previously privacy was paramount at Towns. Originally, drunks were not even allowed to talk to other drunks. Meals were served privately in their rooms. So when Bill was allowed to come back, he was talking to people who weren't used to seeing other alcoholics or talking to other alcoholics, and he was coming back with a solution, which indicates, A, how desperate they were for an answer and how committed Dr. Silkworth was to Bill Wilson's ideas. One of the reasons we consider Dr. Silkworth one of our founders. But let's continue. That's what we're talking about, is they let him come back, and with some misgivings, they let him do it. He said, the cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, please underline, many of them are amazing. Many of them are amazing. And to me, amazing is just another word for miraculous. And miraculous is another word for divine intervention. And I've highlighted actually the rest of this paragraph. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them. Please underline unselfishness, and above it, put the number 1, if you would, please. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them. The entire absence of profit motive. Please underline absence of profit motive and put number 2.
Howard,
Yep.
in the study version, what page is this on? And the study version, by the way, is the same as the 4th edition. They're just page number difference. What page is this in the study version?
Study version, it's page XXV. I'm sorry, I should have said that. In the study version, the red book looks like that. It's XXV.
Is that the same as a leather bound one? Yeah.
Yes, same one. I have the leather bound one, and that's the same page. And in the 4th edition, as I said, it's XXVII, but thank you for pointing that out. I always forget that. And I'm reading from the study version too. Okay, so we've pointed out a couple of made a couple of points here. Number 1, the unselfishness of these men. Number 2, the absence of profit motive. 3, their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power. Please notice power is capitalized. We're going to see power capitalized. We're going to see it sometimes with a lowercase p. Whenever we see it capitalized, we're talking about God. Whatever your concept of God is, whatever you want to call him, whatever Jesus, you want to call him Waldo or Wally, whatever you call your higher power. Whenever this book refers to that power, the P is capitalized. Power with a lowercase p means human strength. Okay. So he said, they believe in themselves and still more in the power, capital P, which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his, please underline these 2 words, physical craving. I know that's a bit of a pain in the ass because there's 1 word on one page and 1 on the other. But I'm asking you to do that because anytime you see the word craving in this book, except for 1 other use, way at the end of the book, anytime you see the word craving, it's referring to the physiological reaction to the ingestion of alcohol. When you hear somebody in a meeting say, man, I had a tough day, I've been craving a drink all day, we know what he means. You know what he means? I know what he means. The problem is he doesn't know what he means in the context of the big book. Because in the big book, craving refers to what happens after you take that drink. Up until that point, it's all up here. Until it goes in us, it can't trigger the craving, the allergic reaction. So anytime you see craving, think physical, which is why I'm suggesting you underline both words. They should go together. Craving in this book means physical. It doesn't mean thinking about drinking. It doesn't mean obsessing about drinking. It means craving because we've already triggered the beast. We've woken up the beast. So, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure. Please underline definite hospital procedure, and you may want to write detox. Before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. And we need to be clear before you can talk to us about these things. I think we'd all agree on that. And I'm going to ask, please, that you highlight the entire next paragraph. Makes it easier than just stopping and starting and stopping and starting. We believe, and again, we as doctors who are thinking like him, and so suggested a few years ago, please underline suggested a few years ago, and above it write Lancet, Lancet journal, April 1937. You have a copy of that. It was sent out in the email package. I mentioned it before. The article was called Reclamation of the Alcoholic. He's referring to that. He said several years ago, 2 years ago, 1937, this book came out in 39. He suggested something in the book. And this is what he suggested. He suggested that the action of alcohol, and please underline action of alcohol, on these chronic alcoholics, please underline chronic versus acute. We're not talking about acute, we're talking about habitual, chronic. That the effects of alcohol on these drinkers is, please underline, a manifestation of an allergy. Manifestation of an allergy. Manifestation, it just means that it's a feature of something. It is the appearance of, the qualities of something. You eat strawberries and you're allergic to strawberries, the manifestation is hives. If you're allergic like I am to ragweed and hay fever and pollen, the manifestation, the physical manifestation is my body sneezes and wheezes and sniffles and sneezes. Sounds like it could be a poem or lyrics from a song. But those are the manifestations of our allergy. That the, and please underline, phenomenon of craving is limited to this class. Now, if this was written today, I don't think he would put the words phenomenon in, because phenomenon is defined as an observable but unexplainable fact. Something you could see, but you can't explain. That is a phenomenon. Personally, when I think of a cell phone, this is a phenomenon to me. You can talk to your blue in the face, but I will never understand how this thing works. How I could type in something here and hit enter, and it appears in somebody's phone across in the ocean in Ireland within seconds of my hitting send, or as I hit it. And how is it that it doesn't bump into one of the other signals coming through anybody else's cell phones, or all of the radio and television and cable things that are out here in the atmosphere somehow? How is it that it doesn't bang into it and send the wrong information to the person I'm sending it to? That is a phenomenon to me. I can't explain how that happens. I can't explain how something like this could be a mega computer. You'll never be able to convince me of it. It is a phenomenon as far as I'm concerned. But today, we have an explanation for how the alcoholic metabolizes alcohol differently than other people. And I'm not going to really take the time and go through it here. You do have it in the emails that I sent out to you. And the article is called No Longer a Phenomenon. So if you want to read about how the alcohol affects your body, it's all in there. Joe and Charlie spend some time explaining it. To me, it makes my hair hurt. I don't really need to know about acetones and all these other things, but that's what it looks like. That's the article. That's the writing that I sent out that just explains why it's not a phenomenon anymore. It explains the alcohol, the reaction of alcohol on a normal drinker, and then on the next page, how it affects an alcoholic. So you could read it, see what it says, but the point is, today, I don't think we would consider it a phenomenon. It is still considered craving. We can take that down, Andy. And like I said, I'd rather not take the time to read all through that. You guys have copies. If you don't, just drop a line to the Big Book Study at AOL.com and ask me for it. I'll send it to you. It'll be on, it's actually already on our Facebook page, the one that listed today's meeting, and it will be on our Facebook page tomorrow when I put up the recording, which will also be on Recovery Speakers in the next few days. And incidentally, I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the meeting. If anyone here is familiar with how to build a web page, please let me know. We're running into a lot of problems with Recovery Speakers, and I think maybe we need to take a more proactive stance here. So if you know how to build a website, I'm interested. But getting back to the book, the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never, circle never, please, never occurs in the average temperate drinker. An above average temperate drinker, I just wrote normal. The normal drinker. Remember, we have an abnormal reaction. Abnormal is not typical, not usual, unusual reaction. And the average temperate drinker, the normal drinker, never experiences craving. These allergic types can never, please circle never, safely use, and please underline, alcohol in any form at all. Let me come back to that in a minute. Let me just finish the sentence. Could never use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit, found they cannot break it, once having lost their confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. There's so much there. Let's break that down a little bit. First part, I said, use alcohol in any form at all. Now, I take a very broad, very liberal interpretation of that. You may disagree with me. You're free to do that. And if you do, you're right. Doesn't matter. But the way I view that is alcohol in any form, meaning could be a liquid, it could be a powder, it could be a pill, it could be a flake, it could be a grain, it could be anything that I could swallow, drink, snort, smoke, shoot, that alters my perception of reality is alcohol in any form whatsoever. Smoking weed is just a different type of intoxicant. Taking the Valium method of recovery is just another substitution for alcohol. So any of these things are alcohol in any form at all, the way I view it. Now, if you want to take a strict interpretation of that, then let's limit it to alcohol in any form at all, meaning anything that contains alcohol. Mouthwash, most mouthwash, a lot of them have alcohol. Probably should stay away from it if that's your view. I didn't realize it, but Kathy and I discovered that most hair conditioners have alcohol in it. Did you know that? We didn't know that. I don't know why shampoo doesn't, but conditioner does, but be that as it may, read the ingredients, it's there. Food that's cooked with alcohol. Now, I know people say the alcohol burns off and there's no intoxication that comes with it, but we have a mind that likes to play games with us. And so we can convince ourselves of something that maybe is not the case and maybe use that as an excuse to go out on a spree. So stay away from it. Probably a good idea to avoid anything that is made with alcohol. If you have that sensitivity, be careful. Know your limitations. So
There's
alcohol,
also, Harry, just to sneak in there, like there's also things we might not think of, like is vanilla extract. There's also like some fancy chocolates or candies have like the stuff inside it that has liquor. And those cherries, I can't see the word mass.
no, right?
Yeah. What?
Maraschino.
Yes.
Yep. all of those things. Probably stay away from them. I do know a lot of people when I was active who, when they couldn't get anything else, were drinking an awful lot of vanilla extract. So it's in there. Okay. So we're saying that we could never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit, and now we're getting into the spiritual malady part of this condition. We've talked about the physical allergy. Now we're going to talk about the spiritual malady that lends itself to a situation where we give into a mental obsession and put that alcohol in our system and then trigger the reaction of craving, and we're off to the races. But it starts with this spiritual malady. And he's saying once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, they've lost their self-confidence. Please underline lost their self-confidence. Please underline reliance upon things human. And above that, let's write beyond human aid. We have placed ourselves beyond human aid. Their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And above astonishingly difficult to solve, I've just written unmanageability. The second part of the first step. First step says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and then there's that little dash that we very often forget is there, that little dash that refers to the spiritual malady that our lives have become unmanageable. First part of the first step says, I can't handle alcohol. Second part of the second step says, I can't handle sobriety. Second part of the first step, rather, says, I can't handle sobriety either. That's the real problem. The problem is not I have an allergic reaction to the ingestion of alcohol, is I have a spiritual malady that convinces me that this time I can take it in and have a different reaction. And that becomes so strong an obsession, mental obsession, that I make the decision to ingest it, and that triggers the physical allergy. And I'm off to the races. So, frothy emotional appeals seldom suffices. Please underline seldom suffices. We are not saying they don't work. We're saying they are ineffective higher powers. Frothy emotional appeals can be an intervention. A couple of people in your life just call you in and they all tell you all the things that you've done and the harms that you've caused. It could be a simple intervention, simple frothy emotional appeal from, say, a parent or a loved one. How many times did my dad plead with me? Please, can't you just stop doing that? And then it got to a point where he said, can't you just stick to smoking it or whatever it is? Why does it always have to be these other things? Shows how his progression, his mind was progressing. But the point is, that's a frothy emotional appeal. I get phone calls from my dad's brothers who would tell me, you may not give a damn what you're doing to your father, but you're harming our brother. Can you either please get away from him or stop doing what you're doing? That's a frothy emotional appeal. Any of those things. They may stop me, and they did for a while. It worked. Okay, I don't want to hurt my dad. But then when it quieted down and I can get away with it, I tell myself I'll stop at a certain point, or one will be enough, and I trigger the allergic reaction and I'm off to the races again. So frothy emotional appeals is an ineffective, insufficient higher power. We're going to run into a number of other things throughout this book. We're going to see in Bill's story where he says fear sobered him up for a little bit. Fear will work. You're afraid of losing a job or losing a marriage or whatever it is, and oh, no, I'm done. I'm not going to do that. And when everything quiets down, we start all over again. So there are a lot of insufficient higher powers out there that may work from time to time. So if you say that, well, I'm not a real alcoholic because I was able to stay stopped because of an appeal, because of a fear, it didn't permanently work, did it? Because if it did, you wouldn't be here. It's insufficient higher power. So he says now, and please highlight and underline this sentence, the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must, is another must, have depth and weight. If you're to get my attention, you have to have experience. Most of my life, I was addressed from above. People above me, whether it's my dad, doctors, judges, psychiatrists, they were all above me telling me what to do, giving me advice, giving me directions, and allowing me to get away with my favorite expression, which was, yeah, but you don't understand. Because they didn't understand. When I came in here and I met you folks, and you had the depth and the knowledge and the experience right away, and don't think I didn't try it. I did. You don't understand. You were just drinking this, or you were just doing that, and nonsense. Nonsense. I had to lose that right away. It's the first thing I had to give up when I came in here, is that idea. But this statement tells me why you can get my attention faster than anybody with 100 degrees on the wall can do it, because you have a message that has depth and weight, and you can hold my interest. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. Recreate their lives. Ideals, according to a 1939 dictionary, are just standards. Our standards have to be grounded in a power greater than ourselves if we are to recreate. Notice it doesn't say restate. It doesn't say rebuild. It says recreate. And according to a 1939 dictionary, recreate means to create anew, something that was never there before. We are not the same people we were when we came in here if we worked these 12 steps. So we're not restoring one's old life. We're creating a new one. And please remember that point, because we're going to be coming back to it a lot. If any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while in the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder, and please underline that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. And please highlight the rest of this paragraph. We feel after many years' experience that we have found nothing, please underline nothing, which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Altruistic just means selfless. It's the opposite of selfish. It's living for others, giving to others. And he's saying here, and again, remember when we talked about this before, that a lot of this doctor's opinion is directed at the medical community. Why he didn't want his name used, why he wanted it called an opinion, so it's clear. But he's also addressing a lot of physicians and begging them, imploring them to have an open mind, to set aside the things they think they know, that I have been on the firing line and I've tried everything and nothing has succeeded like these guys. They've found something. Why don't we give them an opportunity? Why don't we give them a fair shake? Why don't we listen to what they might have to say rather than condemning it by saying it's just a bunch of drunks and they're crazy anyway? What do they know? And he's saying here, you stand on the firing line, you watch what has happened in these people's lives, and you'll see that nothing has done what they've been able to do here. Please highlight, where are we in time? Okay. Please highlight this next paragraph all the way to the end of the page. Actually, all the way till the end where it says, and discontented. They are restless, irritable, and discontented. Stop the highlighting there. So what we've highlighted is men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Please underline like the effect. They like the effect. People who say I drink because I like the taste of alcohol. I don't buy that. It tastes like crap. It just does. I don't want to get too gross, but it does. You know, I love the taste of cold mountain cooled water, but I've never drank a case of it. I don't drink because I like the taste. I drink because I like the effect. Effect means change. My whole life, I felt I was suffering from a spiritual malady. I was never comfortable in my skin, in my environment. I always felt I was outside of everything. I was always acting as if and feeling wrong, was terrified that I would say something and you'd laugh at me and I'd be humiliated. But I took that magic elixir and that changed in the blink of an eye. I became everybody's friend. I was the life of the party. I could talk to and perform with women. All of these things I was never able to do before. Alcohol made me, in the blink of an eye, a combination of Johnny Carson and Cary Grant all rolled into one. For you younger people today, that would probably be like Jimmy Fallon and Ryan Gosling all rolled into one. It allowed me to function the way I always wanted to, the way I saw other people, and I never could myself. I like the effect created by alcohol. Just like today, I like the effect created by meditation. I like the effect created by working these steps. I like the effect created by it. And he's just pointing out that that's why we drink. Produced by alcohol, the sensation is so elusive that they admit that it is injurious, meaning it's harming them. They cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. I think that's worthy of being underlined. They cannot differentiate the true from the false. It's an early reference to insanity. We can't tell the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And please underline that. That's delusional behavior. I convinced myself that if I was diabetic, I'd have to take a certain chemical into my system so that I can function and not die by eating certain foods. I convinced myself that I had something wrong with me, that when I put the alcohol and the drugs into my system, it made me right. It made it right. Bill Wilson said this when he had his first intoxication experience. Somebody handed me a Bronx cocktail and I drank it. And the entire face of the universe instantly changed. It released me from this burden of self, from this gnawing sense of inferiority. That's what alcohol did. I couldn't tell the difference between the true and the false. I convinced myself that that's my condition and I'm treating my condition. That's the only way I can treat it. And that to me is insane. It's delusional behavior. They are, please underline restless, please underline irritable, please underline discontented. And next to it, please write our abnormal reaction to sobriety. We have a physiological abnormal reaction to alcohol, craving. We have an abnormal reaction to sobriety, that when we are in these periods of forced abstinence, we are, and this is putting it mildly, restless, irritable, discontented. That's our state before we convince ourselves that this time it'll be different. Discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Please underline sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. And you may want to circle the word sense, because sense means it's not even real. It's a sense. We convince ourselves that this makes things easier and comfortable. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. Whenever anyone asks me, how do you know that craving refers to the physiological effect of alcohol? I point at certain parts of this book, and this sentence we're about to read is one of them. And I'm going to suggest that you underline it, and underline the first word a few times, after. After they have succumbed to the desire again, and what does the desire refer to? The obsession. After we give in to the mental obsession and the phenomenon of craving develops. So when does craving happen? After we give in to the obsession. After, not before. That's how I know. And Bill and throughout the rest of this section, there are going to be several references. There's about 3 of them on this page alone that say the same thing, that craving occurs after the ingestion of alcohol. They pass through the stages of a spree, well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. Anyone familiar? Sound familiar? Feel familiar there? Here it is, even better. He says this is repeated over and over. Please underline that. What exactly is repeated over and over? Periods of unbearable drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety, followed by periods of unbearable drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety. We drink until we can't anymore. And then we somehow stay sober until we can't anymore. And we drink until we can't anymore. That is what's repeated over and over. That is not a normal reaction. That is an abnormal reaction. And it's because of the way our body handles the alcohol. This is repeated over and over. And let's highlight this, unless the person can experience an entire psychic change, and let's underline psychic change. Psychic is in the mind. That's what psychic means. It happens in the mind. Unless they can experience an entire psychic change, a change in thinking. And here's another way of saying a change in thinking: spiritual experience. So you may want to write that there. Spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, moral psychology. They all mean the same thing. Unless they can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of their recovery. And that's where we're going to stop right now. We have a few minutes. We can squeeze in a few comments or questions if you like. Let's try and do that. If there's enough, I'll hang around afterwards for a few minutes. I think there's one hand up. I see there's someone, Barney. You have to unmute. There you go.
Oh, hi there, Howard. Yeah, actually, I just wanted to ask about the email from week 3 because I still haven't received the email from week 3 with all the links. And Andy F suggested I quickly mention it to you this evening.
Okay, could you put it in the chat? Put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Send me an email if you would, please. Okay.
Yeah,
And
lovely. I'll put it in the chat.
Funny how the mind works. I just remembered before I was telling you about the flyers for addition by subtraction, and I mentioned Tamara's name and I left out Mel's name. And I noticed she's here, so I had to include that. Okay, James.
This is repeated over and over. You mentioned 3 things: the unbearable drunkenness, and what else?
Followed by unbearable periods of sobriety, followed by unbearable periods of drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety. How long you want me to go on? I can keep going on, but I think that's the point, right? Over and over and over, right?
Thank you.
Okay. Al, apparently you're doing more than just listening.
Yeah, alcohol gal. I have wrote down under restless, irritable, and discontented, GSR.
Guilt, shame, and remorse.
I forgot what them.
Guilt, shame, and remorse. There have been times when I've gone through that and I've added that because to me, that's the description of a spiritual malady. We're restless, we're irritable, we're discontented, we're filled with guilt and shame and remorse. I just didn't mention this.
I got it down. Thank you.
Okay, Will E.
Just a quick a comment and an observation. I'm 30 years sober, sitting in a jail, doing an AA meeting, and we got to this sensation is so elusive. And this guy sitting in the back of the room, he goes, I said, I love the sensation of 2 drinks. And he goes, yeah, but you've already had 8 by the time you feel that sensation. From the mouths of babes. I said, that's exactly, but when he starts this statement by talking about alcoholic addiction in 2 spots, the first, and then he switches over and starts calling it an allergy. And I wonder, I'm sorry I got called away at the beginning of this meeting. If you've already touched on it, skip over it. I don't want to be controversial, but I've heard controversial statements on allergy versus addiction. Thank you.
Well, the nature of some drugs today, they are highly addictive. You can become addicted to cocaine and heroin and not necessarily be an alcoholic or a drug addict. I know plenty of people like that. It's the nature of the chemical, and that's the way I interpret that. That could be, subject to debate and discussion, but that's the way I view it. That these chemicals by nature are highly addictive, and anybody who consumes them on a regular basis will feel that heroin is addictive. That feeling, I don't even want to get into describing it, but you want it over and over and over again. That's the nature of the chemical. But to a lot of people, if you separate them from that and keep them away from that, they can safely drink or they can safely have a joint here or there. They're not alcoholics or addicts. Mm-hmm. That makes sense? I mean, that's the way it sounds to me.
Yeah, I've just, in my mind, it's these high school athletes that are taking painkillers become addicted.
Yeah. That's
all.
medication. Exactly. Mel,
Thanks, Howard. That was really good today. I'm Mel, I'm an alcoholic. On page XXVII, the last paragraph, you gave us, we underlined unselfishness, absence of profit motive, and their community spirit, and we numbered them 1, 2, and 3. What was the significance of the numbers, please?
it's what has made them different than others. This movement, this altruistic movement, there's what is an altruistic movement? It's not self, it's unselfishness. That's a definition of altruistic. Entire absence of profit motive. Again, altruistic. Community spirit, meaning they're putting community first rather than self. Altruistic. So it's just saying this is an altruistic movement. These people aren't in it to make a buck. They aren't selling a remedy. This is an altruistic movement. And that's what he's trying to say. Three different say the same thing.
Great, thank you.
It does say this altruistic movement. Now he just describes it, that's all. Randy Goodman.
Hey, how you doing, Howard? A real quick comment. I had a very cool experience with a sponsee who he told me he don't have this abnormal reaction to alcohol. He was addicted to another drug, and I asked him, "So, well, do you still drink?" He said, "Well, no, I won't drink because I know it's going to lead me down to Kensington, PA, to grab some whatever his drug is." And something came to mind, and I responded, "Well, that's an abnormal reaction to alcohol. Normal people don't drink and drive down to Kensington, PA to get a drug." I thought that was, because I was always afraid of that question. I mean, how am I going to respond to that? I don't have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. This time it kind of worked, and I think it's because of the step work I've been doing, and listening to being a part of meetings like this. Because sometimes that fear happens, like, how am I going to be able to respond to some of these questions? But that is an abnormal reaction to alcohol, going down and getting harder drugs. And for that case, it seemed to get through to them. I just had a quick question too about when you mentioned we doctors, and then again he says we believe. Were there any other doctors that maybe Dr. Southworth was discussing these things at the time that he was also referencing, or you still think it's more before?
I think it's both. It's originally I thought he was just talking to his contemporaries, but I kind of broadened it a bit when I did a little bit more reading and found out about these other guys. That all Silkworth was doing in a way is taking the things that they had talked about and focusing on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that helps.
So as we know, there's no other doctors by name that may have been, hey, I think Dr. Silkworth is right here, or anything like that, or.
Well, I'm going to defer that. Gary, are you still here somewhere? Gary, did you want to jump in on that?
Gary's left.
Gary left. Okay.
Like Esther Richards, she suggested.
Yes, go ahead. Esther Richards, here's a great example.
Okay.
And then Dr. Holman. There's a Dr. Holman.
Dr. Howard, you mean?
No, his name's Holman.
Okay.
He's from Johns Hopkins as well.
Sure. Mitchell, you got any names, thoughts? Oops,
Yeah, I'm sure there. Silky was not the only doctor between Towns and Knickerbocker.
Right.
There was a few doctors. Alcoholism has always been a money-making field in the medical profession because relapse people, it's kind of like keep going back and forth. So there were a lot of doctors, a lot of places, a lot of facilities all around. Towns is not the only one. New York Presby up in Westchester, and what eventually became Great House Hospital in Beacon. A lot of the psychiatric facilities eventually, took in alcoholics and so there were a lot of other doctors who were studying that stuff. I mean, if you read the literature, there was a lot of doctors, I'm just thinking about William Seabrook, who was a friend of Marty M. and who was up in New York Presby in Westchester. She mentioned William in her story, Marty. In a hospital for alcoholism. So it's not just kind of an isolated thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Nick, we're
And her doctor gave her the big book.
running out of time. Just hang around afterwards if you guys want to continue to discuss it. I'll be here for what it's worth. This is Mitchell's book, How It Worked, the story of Clarence Snyder and the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous in Cleveland, Ohio. Very highly recommended. Mitchell wrote that book, and we're going to wrap it up. Hun, did you want to take us out?
Yes, all good when you're ready.
Whenever you want. There you go.
Kathy, alcoholic. Our book, Vision for You, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order, but obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Do you unmute and join us? Abandon yourself to God.
Abandon yourself to God.
Your fasting and to your
To Him and to your fellows.
In
the fellowship of the
Spirit.
Surely meet some of us. Such the road.
God bless you and keep you until then.
God bless you and keep
Lord,
you.
Father,
Father, which art in
be
heaven.
thy name.
Name.
Be done on earth as it is in heaven. This day our daily bread.
Forgive us our trespasses.
Against us.
Those who trespass against us. Teach temptation. Deliver us from evil.
Forever and ever.
Ever and ever.
Amen.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Kathy.
Kathy.